if you haven't done the homework up front to really understand your user needs, you're going to fail in compliance and in product development.
Welcome to Lifesci Continuum. Today, I get to speak with Aaron Joseph and Russ Singleton. Aaron is a principal consultant at Sunstone Pilot, where he works with medical device development teams to help them efficiently comply with regulatory requirements for hardware and software development, risk management, and requirements management.
Building an understanding of what their technology was in order to make it work. That's what Phase Zero is about. It's about knowledge building and understanding what the science is and getting the science done.
Russ is a results-driven medical device consultant and executive who turns siloed teams into strategically aligned powerhouses. Rooted in a listen-first approach, he zeroes in on real customer problems, then partners with R&D and tech groups to match the right solutions to the right market opportunities.
Some of those phase zero projects will simply discover that this is not a feasible product.
Right.
And that's successful also. Like, think of how much time and years of development you just saved.
This episode, we focus on phase zero on steroids, getting your innovation off the ground without crashing. We discuss why early stage innovation needs discipline, not chaos, what you should be doing even before product development starts, and how to reduce risk without killing momentum. I'm really excited about this episode and I'm glad you're here. All right, let's go. Aaron, Russ, thank you for joining me today. It's great to see both of you again, and I appreciate you hopping on the podcast. So before we start, let's get a quick background on each of you.
I'm Russ Singleton. I'm a serial entrepreneur and company exec. I've been in roles ranging from straight engineering, running engineering, to running businesses as a GM within companies, and always in tech, always in imaging, the last 15 years in Medtech. And it's just a passion for me. I love it, working with teams and getting stuff out to customers.
Love that. Aaron?
My name's Aaron Joseph. I'm a biomedical engineer and a consultant. So I help medical device companies with compliance for new product development, which is primarily risk management and design controls. But what that really means is helping my clients avoid the many mistakes that I've suffered through over 25 years of working in medical device development. I've worked in over 50 medical device development projects at dozens of companies, large and small. And from that, I've learned a lot about what works and doesn't work for medical device development. Now, every organization and every project is unique, but after you've worked on 10 to 15 projects at multiple companies, you start to see some common threads. And that's really what's informed my consulting, what I help my clients with, regardless of the type of product that they're working on and the special needs of their organization. Those common threads are also, in a sense, what brought Russ and me together. So even though our backgrounds are quite different, we're very much focused on improving medical device development.
So let's get right into it. So one of the things that we've talked about a little bit here before is this idea of phase zero in medical device development. Why don't you give us just a quick intro to what that is, maybe typically, so that we can get into how to do it right and how to avoid doing it wrong?
Sure. So phase zero, to me, I learned it from a early stage in another company, that it's something you do before you start product development. It is basically the idea of trying to understand who your customers are, what their jobs are, how to get those jobs done for them, and then what technology you want to bring to bear to solve that problem. I've always thought of product development as being an entrepreneurial activity, even inside of a larger company. That's how I learned it. And it is basically what inventions you can bring to bear that no one else has to solve the customer's problem in such a way that you have a great business as a result of the whole thing. My experience is that it takes a team of people to do this well. No one person can do it. And even when you talk to customers, it's a minimum of 2 folks to go out and talk to customers, because you want to be listening with different ears, technology ears and market ears, if you will, of really understanding what their job is, because you're not out there to sell your technology. You're out there to solve their problem and what their problem is and how to help them succeed. And so it's a big deal to go out and figure it out that first. It isn't something that you do in a meeting. It's something that you go out into the field and talking to real customers live, face to face. And so that's kind of how I've always thought about it.
Okay.
And I'll just say from my standpoint, phase zero is a little bit odd because by definition for medical device development, it comes before design controls. So as a consultant who specializes in design controls, it was outside the scope of my work. However, I slowly began to learn the signs of, let's just call it a bad phase zero or a skipped phase zero. Because what happens is those things that you skipped over, everything that Russ was just describing, if you didn't do a thorough job in phase zero, it's going to surface later on. And invariably, it's going to undermine your product development, but it's also going to undermine your compliance, because compliance is about making a medical device that is safe and effective, that truly meets the user's needs. And if you haven't done the homework up front to really understand your user needs, you're going to fail in compliance and in product development.
So what I hear you're saying is it's got far-reaching implications. It's not simply kind of, a little piece of paper here. This is pretty important.
Right.
So I'll play devil's advocate for a moment. I'm a clinician who, I'm in practice every day, and I use a device, and I think that the device is fine. However, I see an opportunity for improvement. And so I just start noodling away in my garage and coming up with some things. And you know what? I have my idea. I don't need to go through any of this planning. I don't need to talk to customers. I am my customer. Why would you, where would you push back there? What would you say to me in me saying, I don't need a phase zero? Listen, I know what I know. Let's get right to it.
So I have worked with individual doctors that way. It isn't a unique experience. It's probably a pretty common experience. Do you want to just sell to yourself? Do you want to sell to other doctors? Do you want to sell to other doctors who don't think quite like you? And do you want to build a company? Do you want it to pass regulatory, get through and get into the market and sell a bunch of these? Or are you just selling a few? If you're selling a few, it's probably okay. Or if you're giving them away, it's probably okay. But if you really want to build a business, that's a whole different kettle of fish than just doing it for yourself. And you really need to understand who the customers are, what they're willing to pay, what they want that's unique to their particular experience and what their job is. And it may not be the same thing as you've done every day. And you may be the best surgeon in the world in your particular space, but that doesn't mean everybody's going to do exactly what you do. They may not have the skill. They may need more things than what you have.
Yeah.
So you have to think about all that.
I think that's a good point about sort of physician-led product development. On the one hand, it's a big advantage over, let's say, an engineer starting off with an idea for physicians, which is very common too. But one of the issues that I've seen repeatedly is that whether the physician as entrepreneur or the physician as guiding design of development, they may be like in the top 5% of surgeons for their particular specialty. And as Russ was saying, they don't necessarily represent the market. And they may actually be way more skilled and experienced than the typical surgeon or other physician would be using that product. And so it can be a good start. So that physicians shouldn't be discouraged, but they should absolutely be looking for market validation and really understanding their colleagues who might be considerably less skilled than themselves, and considerably less interested in a new gadget, which is a problem for us.
Yeah, we see a lot of this when we get sort of brought in for downstream work, in that there's a sense that somebody who's gone through the entire journey of coming up with an idea, taking the initiative to think of a solution to a problem, and then going through all of the gates to bring it to fruition, that they are still the customer. And it takes a certain something to go through all those gates, and there's a transformation that happens. And there's really some distance now between being the user of the equipment and actually the founder of the company. And where I'm going at with this is that you're just not the customer anymore. You're an early adopter, and you're sort of in this tiny slice of the total market. If we use technology as sort of a parity here, we have early adopters. Those are the people who are ready for some kind of innovation in the space.
Yep.
In medical devices, we're a little bit more conservative. There are other systems and things we have to take into account. It isn't just everybody's waiting for the next solution for this particular problem. There's a bigger nut to crack here. And so we see a lot of challenges around getting that across to a founder who simply thinks that I've built this thing and people are just going to buy it because it's the magic solution to the biggest problem ever. And so we see a lot of that.
And another key aspect of that, of the phase zero activities, is not only making sure that you have a product concept that is going to be a better solution than what's already on the market, but that it's going to be enough better to justify switching over. And for not only individual physicians, but for hospital systems, it can be quite expensive to switch to a new technology, just a new product. So there might need to be very big gains, either better performance or much lower price to be able to justify that. So that's a high bar for entrepreneurs.
Quick interruption. I've got an offer for med device and life science companies doing at least $3 million a year, but dealing with growth challenges. The first step is really easy. Just connect with me on LinkedIn. The details are below. The rest is to follow. That's it. Let's get back to the podcast. I think there's a sense of the direction that a founder would take in coming up with an idea. But we want to help them get started on the right foot. And so this idea of phase zero is really doing the work to prepare you to get into the work of bringing this thing to market. So, this idea of phase zero, just understanding that, conceptually, but on steroids. So talk to me a little bit about how you can really set yourself up for success there. What are some of the key things that you want to keep an eye out? And maybe also look at this through the lens of, what have you seen, founders do that just got them going down the wrong path and maybe, righting the ship, if you will? Russ, do you want to,
Sure.
get that started for us?
So phase zero is more than just talking to your customers and trying to understand what their job is. It's developing the technology. A lot of times, founders and companies start off and saying, I've got a great idea. Let me go take it to market. And it's never been done before. And they go and do development. What they're really doing is discovery, or they're doing a science experiment. And the idea of phase zero is to do the science experiment. Go ahead and do it. But that's in phase zero, and really put all your discovery out of the way. There's a great story about the Wright brothers, that when they came out with the plane and a lot of people were trying to get the plane to work, they were pretty disciplined in what they did. And they kept doing test after test after test to see what would happen. That was knowledge building an understanding of what their technology was in order to make it work. That's what phase zero is about. It's about knowledge building and understanding what the science is and getting the science done. The other aspect of phase zero is really figuring out what it takes to build a business. So say you understand the market. Let's say you did the discovery work for the science, and you now have a technology that you think is viable and is going to work. What else does it take? How are you going to manufacture it? How are you going to get through the regulatory hurdles? How are you going to get reimbursement for this product in the medical space? You don't have to do the work, but you better have a plan on what you're trying to do. The whole idea is to finish the whole plan. So by the time you've got it, then you got to figure out how you're going to get money, because you all of a sudden said, I can't afford to do this. I need to have someone back me. You're putting a business plan together in such a way that you can present it to investors who will invest in your great idea, and you have all the answers to what you're trying to do. So basically, that's the plan that you're trying to do in phase zero.
Yeah, and even if you're in a larger organization, you're still the goals are still what Russ described. You're reducing project risk upfront. You're ensuring that the product team heads off in the right direction, and you're doing all this before the company commits much larger resources for commercial development. And it's that risk reduction and resource investment trade-off that a lot of companies they seem to get backwards. I think one of the best advice we could give to anyone for new product development, especially very innovative new product development, is don't start development.
Right. So
in a sense, phase zero is saying, hey, spend lots of time in this special, highly flexible, exploratory discovery phase so that you maximize your chances of success in actual commercial development.
So I want to answer the steroids question because I didn't answer that. It's basically putting enough money into this endeavor to answer all the questions. People tend to say, I don't want to spend a whole lot of money up front. I'm going to spend it in product development. Your product development will cost way more than your phase zero, but sometimes you'll underinvest in that space because you just don't want to do that work. It's important to really put the effort and the money and have the right people working on that in that phase. And that's what I mean by steroids. Really, you want to hit a home run, figure out what it takes to hit a home run.
And give that scouting team in phase zero enough time to actually do all the discovery that they need to. And that's why, like a lot of companies, they say, well, we have to get this product to meet this market window, so we got to start development right now. And ironically, they're going to delay their product launch because they're starting earlier, because they're in essence sacrificing the crucial activities in phase zero.
So along those lines, it's really putting a lot of the resources in up front. We hear a lot of, well, we'll just tackle that when we get to it.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to plan to get through the gate when I'm standing at the gate. and so waiting to the last minute to allocate bodies or time, or money, whatever the resource is, that may feel more agile. It might feel faster. But ultimately we know, and it's proven, time and time again, invest more at the beginning, whatever that resource is, to get it done and plan for it. Almost, always leads to a better outcome at the end.
Right.
Absolutely. And understanding too that some of those phase zero projects will simply discover that this is not a feasible product.
Right.
And that's successful also. Like, think of how much time and years of development you just saved. Having, another way to think about phase zero on steroids is that you're fully exploring this space before committing to commercial development, knowing that some of those projects will get canceled.
So part of the activity in phase zero is to come up with a plan. If it's a bigger company, to come up with a plan to convince your internal team that this is something that's worth putting money into in the company. And the answer may be no.
Yeah.
But you want to find that out and then get to the next one, because there always is a next one. It's there's more stuff to do than there are people to do it, unfortunately.
I think something, a lesson that maybe a solopreneur, a founder at the very, very early stages, having identified a need and working through a problem, I think something that they could learn from these kind of larger companies is that idea of feasibility. I mean, it's your baby, right? You're in love with the idea that you have solved this particular problem. But there are a lot of questions there. Why hasn't this been solved before? How come someone else hasn't jumped in here and tackled this? Is it feasible? Do people care enough about this problem to tackle it? Is the market ready for it? Will they accept it and embrace it? So I think there are a lot of things where when this is your first rodeo, and this is why you tap into experts like the two of you, when it's your first rodeo, you kind of don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And it's not an intelligence thing, it's an experience thing. It's having been through it 50 times, and knowing kind of where to poke and what to dig into.
And how deeply to dig also. I think,
Mm-hmm.
I look back to the initial projects I worked on, and we were way too optimistic. We're just barreling ahead and so happy at, all this progress we were making, but we were going in the wrong direction. So if your product team's going in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter how fast they execute. You've got a
Right.
big correction to do.
So there's this euphemism in tech, and it's been around for years before software tech try to co-opt it, which is fail fast, fail early.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea is to really understand. And if you do it in phase zero, you can pivot. You can say, okay, that's not going to work. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to see if there's another way to solve this thing, or if there's another aspect of what the customer is telling me that there's a real product out there.
Yeah.
So those were all the choices. You've got a lot of choices to make, and this is the time to do them.
And I think that's the advice for that entrepreneur who, I was just saying, is like, yes, some of these phase zero projects should be canceled. If you're an entrepreneur and it's your only project, it's kind of hard to cancel yourself. But the advice is really that's the time to pivot. That's
Yeah.
when there is another better solution.
Tell me a story about that. Any examples from your past where you were in a position where the product was coming to market and it just wasn't going to work?
So I was in a small company that we came out, and it doesn't matter what technology it was, but we came out with a product. We spent a lot of time getting it out the door. We did what we thought was the right job to understand the customer needs, but we didn't dig deep enough. And this is a lot of times what happens in startups. You don't get all the information you need to get. So we came up with a product that was called, that I will call it a Swiss Army knife. It did about 4 different things. We got about 3 of them working. We couldn't even finish everything before the product came out. Started selling the product. It was doing well, and we sold maybe a dozen. And then things started slowing down. And this is high-end capital equipment we're talking about. It's like surgical robotics, except it wasn't in that particular area. We had a new person come in, a GM. He put a team together. He said, we're going to go figure out what the customer needs are. And that's where I really learned how to talk to customers and understand what was going on. We went out and talked to customers and started describing what they were saying, what we were doing, and what their needs were. And he said, no, you're not listening. We want this thing, one thing done well, and here's what you need to do. So we really figured out what that was. We came back and figured out that's not the right product. Shoot that puppy. But we couldn't, because it was a revenue generation for us. So we ended up deciding to come up with the next generation product and put that on steroids, if you will, in terms of getting it out the door, really trying to understand what we needed. We needed to invent some new technology to make it work, which we did, and keep that other product going because we needed some revenue stream going. And it took a couple of years to actually get that new product out the door. But when it came out and we continued to do the market validation work, it was a barn burner in terms of what the company did. It grew the company a factor of 10 really, really fast. In fact, much more than a factor of 10 over time now. It's a very, I'm not going to say the company, but it's a very, very successful company in the market right now. So to me, it really pays to understand what your customer's job is and really get it right, and to continually do it. And it also pays to really figure out some technology lever, if you will, to distinguish yourself from anybody else in the market. So once you come out with that, no one's going to catch up.
Yeah, and I want to just chime in here, Russ, because something that you and I have in common is practicing the jobs to be done methodology, and I think the importance of it. And I just want to call attention to that so that the listeners or viewers, when they're going through this and they hear us talking about jobs, we're talking about the jobs that our customers essentially hire our products to do. You know, the things that they're looking to accomplish, and that's a little bit slightly different than like going to work at a McDonald's and that's my job. So as we talk about that and get into that, that's what we're referencing.
So it's probably
Aaron,
worthwhile saying this is an idea promoted by Clayton Christensen out of Harvard,
yes.
who is now passed. And he's basically the guy who promoted that idea some time ago.
And
100%.
by the way,
And what we'll do, sorry, Aaron, what we'll do is when we publish this episode, we'll share some links in the description below, and we'll provide that as a resource, because I'm a huge advocate for people becoming self-educated on that. It makes a huge difference in everything that we do.
I wish I had known about it much earlier in my career. Yeah, so I learned that actually from some product marketing, very experienced product marketing professionals. And it was sort of one of those moments of sort of like, oh, the customer doesn't care about all the cool technology we put in the product. They just want the results.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That was hard. That's hard to acknowledge.
They have their own business and their own thing to do.
Yeah. You're just a means to an end. Exactly.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges we face when we're developing a solution to a problem and a new product is we really, really fall in love with it. Like, we love it so much. Yeah. And that's why it's hard to do some of these other things. Like, we say, well, you should just pivot. Well, for somebody who's really invested in, you know, and in love with that solution that they've come up with, like, they've nailed it. They've looked at the TAM, and it's $18 trillion for the total addressable market. They're, you know, this is going to be the biggest thing ever. They just developed this relationship with this idea or concept, and it's really hard to remove yourself from that. And so having you know, resources like this, taking the time with it to let it mature in that early phase, that phase 0, I think is huge.
And also, the further along you get in development, the harder it is to acknowledge that you're not really meeting your customer needs. Because then, like you said, you have so much invested in that particular solution that it's a really awkward question to say to pose to the product team, is this really the right product that we should be developing? It's like, we've been busting our butts for 2 years to develop this. And what are you saying? It's not the right product. So again, phase 0 is the time to really dive deep into this and make sure you're headed in the right direction.
Yeah. I think something that we touched on briefly before is, really, really understanding the market and the market need, but really the audience or the users, if you will. I think when we're coming up with a solution or developing a product, we're sort of the center of the universe. But when we kind of switch things over to a sale, we aren't the center of the universe anymore. It's the buyer. And so looking, I think, in the early phase of, will the market accept this? And is this the right market for what I'm doing here? I think is really important to talk about. And Russ, you've mentioned that before, is making sure that you have the right market for your product.
Right. So I learned, I forget the methodology that I learned, but I've taken I'm an engineer and I've always been in engineering, but I did take some sales training along the way. And in the markets, particularly in the medical device market and any capital markets that you're in, you have to understand there's 4 distinct buyers that you have to understand in that market. There's the customer that we traditionally think about, the surgeon or whoever it is going to use the product. But there's a hospital. You have to think about the hospital. You have to think about the reimbursement. Is this thing going to qualify for reimbursement? and how are they going to pay for it. And there may be other key people within the organization, within the hospital network, that you have to be thinking about as well. It's a very, very, very difficult thing to really make sure you understand all the aspects of how you're going to get paid, and who is going to get excited about this, and who's going to be your internal advocate for this product that you want to bring to market. And individual surgeons won't always think about that. Maybe the more experienced ones will understand, well, I'm the king in my world, but then I'm not the one who buys it. And so,
yeah, and understanding, especially for medical devices, that whole ecosystem where your product will be used. If it doesn't fit readily into the existing ecosystem, you just have a much harder path to market adoption. It's not impossible if it's a very compelling reason for your new medical device. But if it requires both clinicians and maybe hospital administration to operate differently, that's a challenge that you're going to have to plan for.
That's an interesting point. I think that one of the challenges that people face is this idea that, to simplify it, if I build it, they will come.
Yeah.
But the system is not really designed for that. The system is designed to mitigate risk. And
yes.
the minute you introduce anything new into the system treats it as, as not an attack, but they're not built to embrace change.
Right. There has to be a very good reason for it, is another way to think about it. Yeah.
Right. And it's your job as the founder and the leader to get in front of that and do the work. It's not on the system to accept you and do the work. It's on you to do that. And I think one of the points you've been making is the earlier on in the process, in this phase 0 even, that you can start putting the parameters and the roadmap for those things up, the better chance you have at every single gate that you hit to get through it.
And along those lines, I was just going to say real quickly, that's why your regulatory strategy needs to be started in phase 0. You may refine it later on, but in the same way, you can consider regulatory approval as part of that sort of bigger system. And there may be some compelling features that you want to put in your proposed product that may be very problematic from a regulatory viewpoint. And so you don't want to go very far into development of a medical device without sound, regulatory strategy and regulatory expertise saying, here are the trade-offs. And a lot of companies have found that they're better off launching version 1.0 of a innovative new medical device that has a limited feature set, and then building on that, because then at least you have a regulatory baseline, and you're not facing a whole lot of uncertainty at the end of development, whether FDA or other regulatory bodies are going to accept your innovative device. Like, that would be really bad to find out at the very end of development.
Do you have any examples, Aaron, that you could share?
This is a company that's been beat up a lot, but 23andMe, if you go way back in time, long before thinking about bankruptcy, it was considered this, incredibly innovative company, but they had totally bypassed getting regulatory approval, especially FDA approval for the US market. And they had sort of optimistically said, those regulations don't apply to us. And the FDA disagreed, and disagreed in a very forceful manner, and basically shut them down temporarily. A lot of people may not realize that. So that's kind of an extreme case of just driving forward without any concern about regulatory strategy and what are the implications. But many companies find that after the fact, that there was a much simpler pathway to regulatory approval if they had simply considered a slightly different feature set for their product. And for the US market with FDA approvals, the difference between 510K clearance versus a PMA approval is enormous. So that can add years to time to market. So a key part of these phase zero activities is establishing your regulatory strategy. You have to know that because so many other things will depend on it.
I have a client that's doing that exactly right now. They're out of Germany, and they're releasing in the market with basically their device, but it's limited in what the indications are,
Yes.
and what you can do and what data. It's almost fully functioning as it would be maybe elsewhere, but they can only indicate it for certain uses, because it's not approved completely yet. And rather than waiting for the entire system to be approved, and not launching, or some other option, they are going down that path in getting kind of it's a little bit more than minimum viable, but taking that alternative approach. And if you were just starting out, you might not know that that's an option, or if
Exactly.
you just jumped right into it without spending a little bit of time looking at what even the barest minimum of consideration. And we see that a lot, is just jumping right into it.
I'd like to add to that point because a lot of times I think one of the things you have to decide when you're going after a product is whether there's a lot of competitors in that product or whether this is a space that's wide open.
Yeah.
Now, the downside of a space that's wide open is you may not have a way of understanding how the customer is really going to buy your product and everything else. And I have seen companies build up sales forces and saying, we're going to go flood the market with this thing. And a lot of those guys just don't have a lot to do because it's not the right product. Go out small, as you said, and maybe a very small team of salespeople to go out and sell that and get feedback and understand that you may have to iterate that product and build that into your plan. And that might mean more, a couple of different regulatory pathways for that, one to get out and then another one to be able to add on more features. That's a much more successful strategy.
I was just going to add a famous example of that is the Da Vinci surgical robotic system. So people may not be aware, but that when it was initially launched, it was aimed at cardiac surgery. And some resourceful German physicians said, well, maybe we can try this out on prostate surgery. And it turned out it was an ideal machine for prostatectomies. And that was the first sort of growth market. And that fueled a bunch of improvements and expansion into other applications. And I've seen that repeated for lots of different innovative medical devices where no matter how carefully you research it, because it's so new, in a sense, you have to let clinicians do some experimentation and figure out what's the optimal use of this new tool. And once they do, then you can modify the design for that optimal application, and then it can really take off. So that's kind of that two-step approach, and it's quite powerful. And there's no easy way to sidestep that for truly innovative devices.
Right. I think a lot of companies leave that feedback, that voice of the customer, until very late in the game of commercialization.
Right.
They're thinking about, we have to write content for the website. We have to put together sales enablement kit for, the sales reps. And they're not actually looking, foundationally at the different applications and where this thing could go. And really voice of the customer, again, phase zero on steroids, getting, bouncing these ideas or, drawing. Sometimes it's hard to have a working prototype, but getting the idea in the hands of the people who will use it is really key. We think often of, voice of customer is, maybe a downstream activity, something that we might, slap some copy onto the website, sales kit, brochures and things like that. But really getting that insight and input at that phase zero, on steroids, if you will, can really have a material impact on the direction of the company. And you almost can't get it. You almost can't get too much too soon. And not just from your peers, not just from your buddies or the people just like you. You want a good sampling of the population of the different users who come from, different work environments, who have different roles. Anybody who's going to be, hands on the device at all in any way. That insight is really, really valuable, not just in moving efficiently and quickly, but where you might go with the market.
And not just in phase 0, but continuing that throughout development.
Right.
Because the markets can shift. Some competitor's product comes out, or some new medical procedure. Sometimes medical procedures fall out of favor, or some new medical procedure comes in, and all of those things can affect what your customers are looking for and how your new product will fit in with their workflow.
I would jump right into the real advice. What can you do practically today?
Bill, earlier you were asking about sort of war stories and experiences we've seen, and I did have one from many years ago, which is a company that in essence ignored user needs, that didn't really understand the customer's job. And what was unusual, so this was, I think, my second day with this new client, and they, as they typically do, I asked the senior engineers, I want to get an overview of their product. It was well into late stages of development. And that's usually where, the senior designers are just beaming about their new baby. Well, in this case, the senior engineer was not at all enthusiastic about the product they had spent years developing. And in fact, told me that there were a number of problems that they knew about, but that they couldn't fix because it would be too much paperwork. And I heard that and I was just floored. And that's where, and this is at a medical device company, that's where the quality system procedures have just gone backwards. That's the tail wagging the dog, because the quality system procedures are supposed to ensure product quality, and here they were preventing it. And the other thing about that particular ill-fated product was that it was their second generation, but they had undermined a lot of what they understood for the first generation product that had been quite successful. So they actually messed up both the feature set and the ergonomics in the second generation product.
Okay.
So there are a few things I want to add.
Yeah.
I'll cover the things that you're trying to do in phase 0. But the first thing I want to say, two things, is the idea of phase 0 on steroids is outside of the compliance system. When I put it in place in the companies that I've been in, the whole idea was, no, Mr. Manufacturing Guy, we're not going to sign off on everything. We're not going to have a committee of 15 people to sign off on things. We're going to have a tiny team. So it's really important to make that team small and use outside experts to augment it so that the team is a few people, not a lot of people. Yes, you may need to spend a lot of money to get some of the things done, but you want to keep the team lean. The second thing is the leader of the team or the leaders of the team need to have a lot of passion about what it's going on, because they're going to find a lot of obstacles in what they're trying to do. And they need to say, we're going to figure this out, and we're going to do all the things. So the things that you really need to cover, probably in order, they can be done somewhat simultaneously, is you need to understand what your customer's job is. We talked about a lot about that, but that's what the product is going to do. You need to have an idea of what the technology is. If you're doing I would highly recommend doing development in parallel, so you can start doing a little bit of discovery and then taking that out to the customers and getting their feedback about, this is the direction, this is what we think is going to happen. If you have a straw man or a breadboard or something to be able to show it, that it's even better. And then the third thing is, the understanding the customer's job, understanding what the technology is, getting the risks out of the technology, and then having the not a full-blown plan, but an early plan of what it is going to do all the way to market, all the way to we're going to make this kind of revenue and all that kind of thing. 5 pages, not a lot of stuff, but enough to be able to say, I can walk into a VC's office. Even if you're inside of a company, I can walk into the president's office or wherever I'm going to go and say, here's the idea that I have and what it's going to do. That's what you need to do in phase 0.
We like to see the bones, not really
Yeah.
the structure of it. We don't need to be, getting the detail and the tight brush strokes, but we want to see the kind of that big picture. Aaron, what were you going to say?
So just a little bit of history between Russ and myself. When I first heard the term phase 0 on steroids from Russ, I thought, oh, that's a terrible idea. So I'm thinking about it as a quality engineer from a compliance standpoint. I was like, oh, that just sounds like a way to avoid design controls and everything in our quality system. And it was only through talking more with Russ that it finally dawned on me. It's like, no, it's just the opposite. This is setting up for success so that your design controls, when they do start, will operate properly, because you'll have the known inputs. Your product team will be heading in the right direction. You'll truly understand user needs. So phase 0 on steroids is not an excuse to avoid design controls and the necessary parts of compliance for medical device development. It's actually a way to enhance them.
Okay.
He won me over eventually. So I was like, yeah, that's a good idea.
Right. So on that, what we can work in a number of different dimensions and directions, but would you advocate from starting at phase 0 and projecting out? Or, in some of what we do, we start with the destination and we work back.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I'm doing a plan and actually thinking about all the things that you need to do in product development, we do just what you just said. We start from the result and say, what do we need to do? What's the next thing you need to do? And do that kind of backwards linear progression to figure out of all the pieces that you need to have in place to make that work. Because that'll give you an idea of scope, and it'll give you an idea of all the different things that you need to flesh out. You don't have to do it in a ton of detail, but you have to figure it out so that you know what that is. And definitely think about that. However, answering the other question is, if I'm just starting out and I want an understanding of what the product is, and I don't have all that, and I don't have the technology, and I don't have an understanding what the customer needs are, I definitely would do that at the very outset. And the very first thing I would do is get on your bicycle, get in your car, get in your plane, whatever you need to do to visit customers and really understand. And don't go developing first. Go figure out what your customer needs are first.
Yeah, and the sort of the regulatory aspect or addition to what Russ was saying is understand what kind of evidence you're going to need to produce to get regulatory approval. Are you going to need a clinical study? If so, that's a huge part of your development timeline, and both a big expense and a big time expense. And there's lots of other electrical safety testing, usability testing, sterilization validation. Knowing about those early on means that that's a key part of your plan. You don't have to plan things out to the week or the day, but you have to know about those big pieces, because otherwise they could just torpedo your project.
Yeah, and you could just keep going down the list. Talking about, we touched on reimbursement. There's operations. You're building a business. You've got to build a sales team. How is this going to get out to market? Just even training. I think one of you had mentioned before where a company had gone out there and just didn't have the support structure for the business development team or training in place, and they just really, really struggled.
Exactly. Yeah, and those things are all, for medical devices, those things are all regulated. So, for example, if you need to train physicians to use your new, let's say, surgical instrument or other hospital equipment, you have to do that in a according to regulations, and it's not something that to take lightly. It's a considerable planning expense.
Final thoughts, Russ? Anything you want to leave us with?
This sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah.
I would recommend not getting afraid of it. Just, the one thing I found in really going out and talking to customers and figuring out what your needs are is you can get really excited. They get really excited about it. Bring your passion out there and just go at it. But go at it, and the first thing, if I can only do one thing, it's to go talk to a single customer, and then two, and then go on from there.
Absolutely. Aaron, how about you?
I would say knowledge is power. So the more knowledge you have, the more you can improve your chances of success with new product development. And also, I'll just say a plug for our industry that developing new medical devices is difficult and takes a long time. But the rewards are enormous. So you could be helping thousands of patients all over the world. And that's a big deal for anyone working on new product development.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would just say to the people listening or watching, just give yourself the permission to not feel like you have to do it all yourself. We know you're smart. We know you're capable, but you only have so many hours and there's only so much one person can do. So give yourself that permission to rely on resources, on the experts like Russ and Aaron. So thank you both. Russell, Aaron,
well, thank you.
You guys were great today. This was awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you made it here, thank you. If you haven't already, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you want to learn more about this topic, I expand on it below, as well as in my LinkedIn newsletter. That's all for now. More soon.